By the way, I do want to mention that's when you know you're about to, like, we're about to record a snooty podcast when it starts with Roman history. That's when you're like, okay, somebody didn't get all of this out at the cocktail party they were at. The first Senate.
All of it? Are we going to start
All
in the
of it.
beginning here?
Oh, we're covering the entire breadth of Roman history.
Oh God.
We're actually covering land and property ownership in Roman history, specifically from the point of view of the Senate. So, the first 100 senators of Rome, when Rome was founded, they mostly sent local families and tribal leaders, and some of the senators obviously would have been appointed by Rome's first king, Romulus. But it was kind of like, from my understanding of history, which is filtered through a fiction writer who watches too much stuff, basically.
Yeah, but you're as far as just facts though. Usually, you do your research and you dot your I's and cross your T's.
Right. So, with that, I do, and I try. And with that said, Rome's first senators were basically just like a collection of family leaders, tribal leaders, bosses, people who are respected politically, people who would have a lot of sway and swagger. And they basically were picked because they would have a lot of stakes in what was going to happen to Rome. Like, they were picked almost like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. We won't, like, not all these guys were heroes, obviously. They were powerful men with a lot of money. So, like, they got it in a time where it was like ancient Rome, so a lot of them got it through, blood and treasure. But they at least had a stake in the success of the state. They were starting basically a country. That lasted until Augustus. Under Augustus as Caesar, he made a new rule, which is if you were going to be a senator, you already had to be rich. And I believe partly, like I read an online commenter, like a lot of this was thought to be corruption. And one online commenter was like, actually, Augustus was trying to keep corruption down. He kind of did the same math that Trump did, which is Trump said, I don't need to be corrupt. I have my own money. Like, this is how you know I won't take bribes. I'm already a millionaire. The thought behind having a senator need to already be a landowner that makes 1 million sesterces a year is that you won't be easily bribed. Somebody will have to exceed your money basically before you can be bribed.
That kind of makes sense a little bit, right?
Yeah, it does a little bit. And it also makes sense in that they would have a stake in what was going to happen because they had land. Like, who's going to defend Rome harder?
Just to give you some credibility on this whole Roman thing, you had an article, a writing that you did that was nonfiction about Rome, right? About the gladiators. What was that? That went viral. It was a huge.
Before the show Commodus came out on Netflix, I had an article about how Emperor Commodus was way crazier than the movie Gladiator portrayed. And when the show Commodus came out on Netflix, the article went absolutely bananas. Like, it went viral, and I think Cracked had a mirror article similar to it. So I have always been interested in, like, Roman history generally as sort of a template for politics. That's how I interpret a lot of today's politics, and that's what we're talking about today, is the idea that, if a senator already has a ton of land and a ton of resources and a bunch of money, why are they still corruptible? The idea that, they wouldn't take a bribe because they have so much money. Is that true? Or if they have all this land, are they going to have Rome's interest at heart? Like, if a senator owns, 2% of Rome, are they going to defend it? Like, would they vote for good policy? Would they vote for,
or does
good
power and greed still win? Is that a never ending? Is that a bottomless pit?
Right. Well, that's what Rome found out is like, to keep their senators from basically doing what our senators do. Like, we have so much corruption. We have, our representatives will oftentimes not technically do insider trading, but they will have pre-knowledge of something's going to happen. Like Nancy Pelosi divesting her interests right before COVID. That's the kind of stuff that Rome tried to prevent, and their method of preventing it.
Or congressmen, senators coming into office with a net worth of $1 million, but leaving with 30 million, you kind of scratch your head.
Right.
When they haven't been working in the private sector, that how did they accumulate these riches?
Right. Right. Or like Ted Cruz. Like I remember an article coming out about how Ted Cruz had put the most money into a campaign that any senator had ever done. Like it was just like an absurd amount of money from his own coffers, and it was like, yeah, but how did he get that? Like, it doesn't. Yeah, having money already does not make you less corruptible. It means you did something to get that money in the first place, and unless you live in Atlas Shrugged, unless you did something purely genuine, like you just had a great product or you just developed the right thing online, then you probably did something to get that money. You probably engaged in not something necessarily illegal, but certainly something that doesn't fit into good morals as far as like corporate standards of today. Um, and that's something Rome found out very, very quickly. The idea was that they couldn't trade. They couldn't even be traders. They weren't allowed to engage in banking or take on any public work or own a merchant ship unless the other senators okayed it. And that was supposed to keep them on the straight and narrow politically. And what ended up happening is the other senators just okayed it all the time. Like they were just like, oh yeah, no, that guy, yeah, he can go ahead and do some insider trading. He can trade with this other country before Rome absolutely sacks it and goes to war with it or whatever.
He had a license to steal.
Right. But the thing that really brought, like, have you ever looked at the series The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire?
I have. Yeah, and I was just going to say that you'd be the first person that I'd poison. You don't talk about ruthless politicians and family nepotism. I mean, you want to talk about anything goes.
But if we want to condense all of Roman history down to like one sentence, we're going to go with a guy named Pliny the Elder. Pliny the Elder saw what the senators were doing. He was writing the history of Rome, and he basically used the quote, it's great estates ruined Italy and the provinces. And what he means by great estates, he means land ownership by politicians. Latifundia is a term that Rome used when they started collecting so much land into senator hands that senators basically ended up being their own countries. You would have a senator like similar to Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner owns 9,000 residences. You would have a senator who would have like hundreds of acres and have 9,000 people toiling on his acres or working on his land and living on it. And it slowly fractured Rome. Like that's exactly what happened. Is Pliny was saying that if wealthy politicians owned all the land, they wouldn't represent the people. They why vote for what's going to help Rome if the next law you pass could help your small fiefdom? Like if you're passing, should we all pay taxes toward this giant Roman machine and let Caesar go to war with somebody, or should I pass the law that says let's keep the money in the hands of the senators right now, or should I pass a law that helps literally just my little corner of the countryside and nobody else? And that's what the Senate ended up being. Is it was a lot of people defending their small land ownerships and their the latifundia. The reason why all this is important is because they say what's the old phrase from Mark Twain? History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes a lot.
Oh, I do like him. He's clever. Yeah, there's some coincidences, right?
Yeah, I want to lay out the rhyming of the history for this, because we are singing a tune, like we are almost doing a rhyme with Rome at this moment.
We all know that Rome thing doesn't end well. Let me remember, right?
Right.
Even Rome didn't last forever. You can only become a world power for so long, and then you implode.
Right. Those landowners, the vast landowners, they decide that they actually don't need Rome anymore. Like their interests would be better served if they were their own little countries, and Rome starts to fracture, and it fractures into two. and then fraction to several more pieces, and it slowly just shrinks down, and you get Italy, and you get a bunch of other countries. I mean, like that was one of the tweets that you and I talked about when Nancy Pelosi was caught, basically similar to insider trading, just pre-knowledge trading. Somebody brought up the question on Twitter. They're like, should we let politicians have any say in the market? Should we allow them to like have investments? Because so many of them do. There was there's a joke YouTube channel called Real Advertisements for Governments, or Real Government Ads. And so they poke fun at government policies as if it is like a 90s infomercial and they're trying to sell it to you. And one of the things they talk about is they are like, oh, you don't like the current housing policy? Well, you should, because your senators and Congress people do. And then they outline that half of all Congress people and senators for Australia, America, and several other democratic countries are landowners, and they have investments in landowning companies. So real estate as a investment is becoming something that well actually let's get into that. Like have you actually thought of investing in housing yourself?
I have, and I've through the years I've owned, at one point I owned 3 houses. The banks owned them, which they reminded me as they foreclosed on them, but I did have aspirations. I was a landlord for a good amount of years, probably 7 or 8 years. And
Okay.
I love real estate, and everyone I've known who has bought houses and held on to them had been very comfortable in their older lives. And I don't know one exception to that. So it's something that I feel confident in.
I feel the same way, but I think that's also an older model of ownership or housing investment. So like the 1960s is when the government first enacted legislation to allow investors to generate income from real estate. And so this is what we think of when we think about like housing investment is you buy a second home or you buy a third home. Like we know a lot of friends. I mean, I think that's what Chris Wilkes does. And it's just another investment. It goes to your portfolio. You rent those out, hopefully to decent people that you vetted.
Yeah, and forget about it. You rent them out, and you're not refinancing it every 6 months or trying to,
Right.
Yeah.
You put some money aside so that like if something goes wrong, a pipe breaks, then you can fix it quickly because you have part of their rent set aside to do that. And that got more popular in the 80s. Like it was legalized in the 60s. So I used to think this wasn't a very old thing, that housing investment must have gone back to like, the founding of America, but that's not really true. Housing as a portfolio investment, it was legislated in the 60s. In the 80s, it got, it actually started landing on desks. Like if you're a Wall Street advisor, in the 80s is when you would start telling people, hey, maybe you should buy a second or third home. Like it will help you into your retirement. You'll have a source of income. And then in 97, it gets popular. It continues to build popularity, I should say. That's when Rich Dad Poor Dad comes out. Is 1997. Robert Kiyosaki pats himself on the back for having the quote unquote original idea of investing in housing. Like that's if you read into that book, I know I shit on that book a lot, but if you really read into it, he talks about looking for opportunities everywhere and changing the way your mind works so that you can keep an eye out for opportunities. But honestly, the opportunity that made him rich is the opportunity that was making everyone rich in that year. Isn't
that just really good marketing? Like that, just a good title.
It is.
It's a suggestive title, and it's kind of up there with those titles to me. Why Men Love Bitches. It's just something you got to read. I want these hacks, these life hacks.
It honestly, like the book, as much as I make fun, it did illustrate the idea that to be a very wealthy person, you need to make your mind keenly aware and almost like a net for good ideas and like for seeing advantages where other people don't see them.
Can I say just having a rich dad works too?
Yeah, that's a huge thing. Yeah. Having somebody give you $1 million investment.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
You're becoming a millionaire to get that first million given to you. It's wonderful.
They say the first million is the hardest, but not if your father just loans it to you. It's way easier. So after the sort of like housing investment boom, we get into the 2008 housing crisis. Now, that crisis wasn't caused by investors. I really want to point that out. Like, it seems like this timeline I'm leading up to, and that's how investors ruined America. That housing crisis was made by banks who were, if you watch The Big Short, it accuses banks of tricking people into accepting loans that they couldn't afford. And then those houses eventually, they can't pay them. Investors are investing in the mortgages and mortgage-backed securities. They're not investing in the house itself. And these mortgages, these faulty mortgages, go bust, and so everyone goes bust.
I do think there was an element of people who had fixed loans who just didn't like the fact that their house had dropped $100,000 in value. They just couldn't
Right.
live with that. They had put so much weight in the fact that they had $300,000-$400,000 equity and their house was going up 50 grand a month, that they were such savvy real estate investors, like we all felt in 2006, 2007. You look at it a lot different when your house is going down $30,000 a month.
Right.
You feel like you're on a ship taking water, even though you're on a fixed, and even if you would have ridden it out, you'd be way hard ahead because it bounced back. You feel like you have to do something.
Right.
And something was run.
You're dead on. And so many people ran away from their investments, and those families and those investors who ran away from dead houses, and I mean, I remember watching the news and seeing like empty houses, like just a camera panning across a neighborhood, like one of those cookie cutter neighborhoods that was just devoid. Like it looked like a ghost town. And it was because so many families had gone bust and like couldn't pay their bad mortgage that the bank had like, almost promised them would be reasonable, and they just ran out. So who do you think bought up all of these empty houses after the housing bust?
I'm thinking some savvy investor, somebody who just saw something that wasn't. Who was it?
That's right. It was the majority went to real estate investment groups. And now we get into the crux of this episode, why it affects housing today. Those investment groups got started. What happened before the 2008 crisis? People were investing in mortgages. And then the 2008 crisis made houses look bad, but these savvy investment groups came in, and the idea is the best time to invest is, what's the old phrase? The best time to invest is when there's blood in the streets. There was a lot of blood in the streets, and so they went around and they collected up these houses as if they were like the knocked off houses from a Monopoly board that had been flipped.
And that makes total sense, Joe, because all major, Microsoft was started during a recession. A lot of companies, and the reason is your money just goes so much further. So if you're well funded and everything's cheap, well, cash is king, right? So it's time to strike when you're at a bottom that you can clearly see. You don't have to even be a savvy investor to say these houses are in Dallas, Texas, and Los Angeles and New York are going to go up. They're not going to go lower than this.
Right, and you get a house with a bad mortgage. You pick one up for $80,000, and then you zoom forward to people are starting to get money and people need houses and they're starting to rent, and we build up to 2020, and the housing market is slowly coming back, and it's slowly coming back, and then COVID hits, and it doesn't just come back. It's suddenly everybody is locked indoors during COVID in 2020, wishing they had a house, and they weren't just sort of staring at their wife or significant other in a tiny apartment that they had been renting, and they're like, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we had an actual house to live in and start a family instead of being locked up together? Everybody went stir crazy.
Well, Joe, I have to ask you this too. Were these investment groups, did they really have their fingers on the pulse of the rental market as well?
I think that between 2008 and 2020, I think it was fairly reasonable. I think it was, they had their finger on the pulse of rent was safer. Again, 1980 is the recession that got everybody into investing in housing. 2008 was another recession, and that's what got people investing in houses as a rental piece. This is not a shocking thing. It's these investment groups are savvy, but also it is very predictable that humans, when we are pressed, will stop investing in the market and we'll start investing in houses and investing in things that have a absolutely guaranteed return income, like rent, People have to live.
Yeah, it's something you can touch and see, right? It's like gold, right? It's not. It's different kind of investment. It's something that you can really. I think it's easier for a less savvy person that invested in a company.
I I think that is so dead on. You said something you can touch and see. I mean, literally in Rich Dad Poor Dad, he talks about like he physically jogs to the houses he wants to buy or invest in, and he looks them over. Like it is literally something you can look and see. You can take a picture of it, like you're supporting somebody starving in another third world country. You can look at a portfolio and be like,
Yeah,
yes, I'll put money into that poor thing,
and
and then
you can control the decisions, right? If we put a new roof, who we rent to, what credit score we'll rent to, and what will. When you're investing in a company, you're hoping you're handing over that trust to to
right.
these other people.
So during the COVID crisis, all these people are renting. Rent is going up because the people who are, like landlords, they don't have other jobs and they suddenly have a ton of expenses because of COVID. So rent goes up, like just across the board, across America. I'm not going to get into extreme specifics like county by county. The idea is that everyone suddenly started charging more for rent because they could basically get away with it. Like people were locked in with COVID, they can't go anywhere. So what are you going to not charge them extra money? Um, and that was the experience of it. I had a lot of friends who lost apartments and houses because the rent went literally as high as they legally could in a year. Oregon has a cap on how high you can raise rent in a year. Isn't it like 10% more or 5% more, something like that?
It's something like that, but yeah, and don't even get me started on that because there's no. Yeah, not that I'm for socializing anything, but they don't have any. It's not tied to improvements to the property either. I mean, some of these places that you pay uh, mortgage size rent, over mortgage size rent, are places that aren't even fit to live in. I mean, they're teetering on slumlord shit.
Aha. Okay, that is the thing. Houses and rent across the board in America from 2020 to now has exceeded mortgage payments. We had a couple of years there where renters, or we had a couple of years there where landlords were raising rent higher than what people would be paying monthly if they had just bought their own damn house. And that's what a lot of my friends tried to do. I think during COVID, everyone tried to do the same trick. Everyone went out to buy a house all at the same time because everyone realized, hey, I should be paying into a mortgage. Like one of the absolute core rules of building your own personal wealth is own your own place because you get to keep the money in the end, or you get to have an asset in the end. Whereas rent, you
Or
get nothing.
and if you want to be depressed, just do the math on what you pay in rent in over a few years.
Right,
It really is gone, and it breaks your heart a little bit. Do it over a decade or do it over 20 years. It gets worse.
right. So during this horrendous market instability, there's a lot of articles out and have been that talking about how like the richest 20% in the world, like what is it, doubled or quadrupled their value during COVID or something like that. This is how they did it. They did it through almost entirely through land and rental investments and things like that. Um, I'm sure there was a lot of other purchasing and there's a lot of other industries that made off. I mean, like we do not have time to get into what pharmaceutical companies, the wealth they accumulated from the government during that period. But the idea is if you are a casual investor like myself or Todd, it looked smart to own a house before this. And after this, it looked smart to start taking rent, as much rent as you could from your renters. That was just the financially intelligent thing to do. That is why in quarter 1 of 2020, a median house would go for about 260,000. By the next year, the median house went for 330,000, meaning that in 1 year they left the reach of people earning the median income. So you went from before COVID, you could financially afford a house if you lived within a metro area, like a city area, and then after COVID, you couldn't. Like I think people. Am I exaggerating this? Because when I talk to people about this, when I'm like, no, it's out of your reach if you are rent burdened. That's the phrase they use.
I I think it was such a twist because it really looked like we're headed for another 2008. So when
Yeah.
I bought right in the middle of COVID. I bought a condo with my wife, and it was really like this seemed really stupid. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
this is really dumb because these
You're
things are
buying
going to
before the
drop a
crash.
100 grand, and we were just going to. And that's what I was thinking. I think we're going to lose 100 grand, and I'm going to be the biggest horse's ass. But it just didn't happen. And our final thing was, if we don't do this, rent isn't free anyways.
Yeah.
And that was the finally closing. Like, at least we can not that it's not free. At least we can lock this in.
Right.
Rent, it's just who knows. They're just charging so goddamn much for just so little. It's really uncomfortable where there's no parking and there's no space and it's noisy. All for $3,000 a month.
So there's a timeline there of doubt that I'm going to walk through, and you tell me how right this is. In 2020, median housing prices were 260,000. Everybody was trying to get their own house because of COVID, but we also all believed that the market would eventually come back down. Like the belief was, let's not buy too high because this
Yeah.
inflation can't last.
It's a little crazy right now, but it's gonna even itself out. Absolutely.
By the same time next year, it was 330,000. So like it went up almost 100,000 for the same median house. And that's when everyone was doing the same math you're doing. It's just like 2021, that it's that much more. It's like, holy shit, I would be dumb to get a house now because the market has to come down. There literally can't be this many people who need houses for this long.
Yeah.
And like I said, at this point in our narrative, a house is out of reach for anybody who is rent burdened in the metro area of any city. The self-help books we've mentioned, The Richest Man in Babylon, Rich Dad Poor Dad, they also talk about socking away like 10% of your income. If you did that, making the median wage, it would take you more than 10 years for the down payment. And people aren't buying houses for, the recommended 30% down. People are buying houses for the full amount and going over the asking price. Fast forward to 2022. Anybody who bought a house when you did, Todd, is like, okay, it's got to crash. Like we're going to look dumb very soon. Didn't happen. And the reason why it didn't happen is because, the two most common reasons were there aren't enough houses being built, that during COVID, there hadn't been enough construction going on. And so the
Supply and demand 101,
yeah,
right?
the supply wasn't there. But there was a smaller story that almost didn't get reported on. The news talked about investors, that about 13% of all starter homes were being taken off the market by investment groups. And that, these investment groups, they're not you and I buying an extra house or a third house or whatever to rent it out and retire comfortably. These are investment groups where they will buy 20,000 houses in one metro area, and they have a board of investors. They're not even buying in the same state. They're buying usually from out of state. And they will just lock down an entire city or metro area and make that basically a rental. Like they will turn a neighborhood into a rental neighborhood.
Big investment companies like yours are being blamed for this huge increase in rents across the country. And you can set the rent any way you want, really.
There's a lot more going on than just corporate landlords bidding up homes. It's a very competitive and difficult environment.
And it was only about 13%. That's what I heard is, I firmly actually believe, here's my tinfoil hat theory, I think some of the news media that didn't want to report this had investments in this. Like, I think it was a smart investment to make.
Go over that number again. How many houses did you say? It was a lot.
13% of all starter homes in that year, in 2022, were being taken off the market by investment groups that were outside investors from other states.
Well, think about how that just sways price values, that kind of buying power. I mean, especially above the retail price offer, and then you have that volume of money coming in. I mean,
oh yeah.
It bumps everything up, right? How could it not?
If 1 in 10 small starter families or retiring folks who were like, I want to get a rental property to help me retire, or your 1 in 10 millennials, or the generation below them who are like, it's time to start a family. If 1 in 10 did not get a house because an investment group came in and bought it all in cash the full amount over the asking price, then that means that's that's a tremendous amount of people who have the money and are paying citizens and are doing their taxes. Like these are honest people who are not going to get a house. These aren't
the way you
yeah.
say that has such a Darth Vader feel about it. It's like this person from out of state. I could just see this like Texan with this long, big Cadillac and a hat. Say, hey kid, I'm gonna make you a deal.
Well, but
that's how you make it sound.
What you should be imagining is the same jackasses from 2008 who overvalued mortgages and crashed the market, because that's the same people. It's the same.
There are no consequences. They're rich again, just doing it in a different way.
That is exactly right. That is what I'm saying. Is the same investment groups, like under different hats, under different companies, under different guises, but it's all the same Wall Street game. It's okay. So that mortgage thing didn't work, and we accidentally destroyed the market and got people, we lost people's homes, and those got snapped up by other investment groups.
Yeah.
Now, what if we try to invest in houses, but this time instead of the mortgages, we bought the houses outright and we just put the rent up at maximum?
Yeah. Now that we've driven the value down in the dirt where we can afford it, now we're going to buy them and then jack the rents up.
Right. So last year I was watching CNN, and one of their commentators was like, oh, 13% is nothing. 13% of starter homes being taken off the market. That's insignificant. The big buyers are people. The people driving up the prices are millennials who are buying these starter homes, and they're starting families in them, those fucks. and they're like, but it's an insignificant part of the market. The market will, adjust to that. Supply and demand will happen. It won't be a big deal. Fast forward to the reason why you and I are doing this episode today. I was looking through the numbers on that very particular thing. Nationwide, how many starter homes have investors bought up? It is now up to 25%. So 1/4 of all new houses and all starter homes are being bought up by outside investors. Now that sounds small still. Like if 1 in 4 new families could not get a home because investment groups are buying up whole neighborhoods, they are targeting areas where the housing is the most needed. So it's not that they're targeting
the demand. They're not going evenly. They're going in areas where that makes total sense.
Right. It's not like, I'm fairly wealthy. I have 5 extra houses that I rent out. I don't need one of those, so I decide to sell it. And I sell, a 3-bedroom sprawling ranch out here in Texas, and I sell it to one of these investors. That is not what they're doing. They are coming into a neighborhood that has been built for low-income folks, and they're buying up, 5,000 houses in Atlanta, 12,000 houses in Columbus, Ohio, 20,000 houses in the Travis County in Texas. They're specifically targeting. I'll read a couple of these out. Let's see. Columbus, Ohio. There is a company called American Homes for Rent they operate out of Las Vegas. They don't live in Columbus, Ohio. And they buy up almost every starter home available in Columbus boundary, and they purchase above asking price, and they rent them at the maximum legal profit. They call it a pinch. It is pinching out anybody who might be a homeowner in that city someday, or anybody who would want to start a family there. They're doing such a absolute pirate job of it. Like if this was just they put it up for rent was kind of high but reasonable, and they bought 75% of the houses that were available, the starter homes that were available, that would fly under the radar still. Like that would be last year when people were saying it's not significant enough to change the market. This is not that. It is so bad in Columbus, Ohio. They're passing new bills. Like the local government has gotten involved, and they are trying to pass a bill which would tax $15,000 a month per property for companies trying to turn their city into a damn rent factory. In Mecklenburg County in New York, investors bought up all the low-cost, low-end, or starter homes in the county. And they specifically targeted homes that were, they knew the renters would have to be forced into renting back from them. If let's say, Todd, you live in Mecklenburg County in New York, you own a couple of homes, you decide to sell one of them because you need the extra money and you want to like upgrade for your retirement, or if you just, maybe you want to get like 10 more cats and you decide you need an extra bedroom for them. And then you go outside and you're like, oh, that was a good deal. I sold my home. Time to buy my new home. And then you look on Zillow or Redfin and you see that absolutely every single home in the city is owned by my investment group, and you can't own one anymore. You have to rent. So like you want to go to your new upgrade. You want to change houses to the new hotness that you were planning on buying to fit all your cats in the room. And your only choice is to rent from me, and I am now renting at double what rent used to be. Like I am a single family starter home is now, $1,200 to $2,000 a month.
Why can't you say multiple wives? It make me sound more interested than multiple cats, which is the truth.
Todd is a old cat lady in a powerlifter's body. I don't.
That's what I kind of got the attitude you were putting out.
That's not attitude.
It's not untrue.
Write
It's
that on
100%. That's why it hurts so much. It's so true.
Yeah, it's
That, but I would be like, what? I made a deal with the devil. I go, I'm part of the problem. Like, hey, this isn't fair.
right. Absolutely, and that's what people are. That is the reaction people are having. There's a lot of every week there are news stories talking about why houses aren't selling. Well, one part of it is mortgages are high, so nobody wants to sell and have to pay a higher mortgage when they leave their current house.
You're gonna get your payment's going to go up, and you're going to be in a smaller place. You can't replace what you got. You just can't.
Right, but on top of that, if you live in one of these metro areas where a rental investment company owns every property, you literally can't sell, because if you stepped out your front door and you got rid of your house behind you, you give the keys to somebody else. You got nowhere to go.
You know what scares me about this more than anything, Joe?
What's that?
Is that this is such a good idea and such an easy idea, and it's going to work, that other companies are going to say, hey, if they've got the pockets for it, hey,
Oh, it's funny you say that, because I got another story here. Texas always leads the way in unregulated shittiness. Texas, a company started here called Housing Select.
You're still claiming land out there, right? Kind of thing.
Yeah, unfortunately. Texas, according to Texas Monthly, the online magazine, Texas led the way in having the most institutional buyers. It is now up to like 28% or 30% here. And some of the major counties out here, like big counties, like Dallas County or Travis County, where Austin is. Let's see, Tarrant County, 52% are owned of starter homes are owned by investors. Rockwell is 45, Midland is 44, Dallas is 43. Like, there are counties out here where half of all of the starter homes that would otherwise go to a family or an old lady trying to retire and get a source of income, they're being bought up by these investment groups who are becoming rent fleecers. They jack the rent up all the way, and then they make it to where you have to rent from them to even live in the city. And I kind of it's hard to look at this from a pro-capitalist position. Like, I believe in capitalism, and the idea that people have. One of my friends asked me, "Is it really that bad turning all these families into renters? Because eventually they'll find a way out." Like, the idea is they'll rent for a couple extra years or something, and then they'll go, they'll find a solution. They'll buy a house elsewhere, or they'll build or something. But if you believe in capitalism or the middle class, like I do, this is the absolute worst possible outcome. It's not about slowing somebody down on their way to investing in their future or having a family or starting a life. You're making people not want to invest back in your society. Like, if you don't have a piece or ownership of your neighborhood, what is the point? Like why run for local government? Why participate in taxes? Why do anything?
Well, let me add to that, Joe, too. A lot of people, they're going to have the old, the retiree attitude. Well, nobody gave me anything. And the old pound on their chest. That's why these kids have to save their money. But I really like you to sit down and take college educated, income. College educated now. Make it a couple, and then figure out the math on what they could afford to buy. And it's pretty scary. And then what the payment would be and what their life would be like for years to come,
Right.
just to pay the mortgage.
Right. That is a really good point. I respect the hell out of everybody who I know who is a little bit older and who did work their way through college and who really did work their way through a house and mortgage.
But it was so much more affordable then. Both of those things you just talked about.
Right.
It, comparably, if you were to take dollar per dollar.
And I get the sense oftentimes when I talk about the impossibility of home ownership now that my older friends think that what I mean is difficulty. That when I say that it's impossible, they think I'm saying that it's tough.
No,
and that they had it tough and that they worked for 20 years or 25 years at a labor job to pay off their house. And they did. And that is something that is extraordinarily impressive. Like, I honestly can't imagine how some people have held down jobs and mortgages and families as long as they have. It is crazy. But what people who are trying to get into starter family homes now are facing is the amount that is being asked of them to pony up front is pretty much the full amount. It is an amount that they cannot physically make. If there's no saving that could do it, like, it's not that they put aside 10% a year and they could get it in like 10-20 years. They literally would have to save all of the money after expenses, rent, food, and healthcare. They would have to save everything they had for 40-ish years before they could afford a starter home. And they wouldn't even be getting there'd be no trading up. It would just be the cost of the initial starter home, possibly not even over asking price, possibly not even all the other stuff we talked about is necessary to beat the investor groups.
And then the clock starts on the 30-year mortgage. So
right.
So it's literally the only house they'll ever be able to buy, and it's not a dream home. It's just a roof. It's just one step nicer than the apartment,
Right. I went a very, very unconventional path. What I've done is from my last job, I purchased several travel trailers that were being used and kitted out as homes in Texas by people who were of lower means, and they ended up selling them. We picked them up, and we have been converting them to basically like Airbnb style tiny rentals, because
it's tiny homes,
yeah, but specifically for Airbnb. We don't want to fleece people of rent in a trailer. That would be monstrous. We are doing it as Airbnb. Because
people like that shit. They like to live in vans and stuff, Joe. Especially people with a lot of money. I don't get it either.
Absolutely. Like, would you rather rent a single room from an Airbnb where it's like you have to walk through a living room where people actually live there to get to the room to stay the night for $90, or do you stay in somebody's trailer where it's off the grid, it's isolated, you can stay in it for the same amount, and it's it's just
let's talk about rental discomfort too, that a lot of probably 100% of the people listening to this show own homes, right? And are well, they're educated, they're well to do for the most part. We've been situations, and they probably did when they were younger too, where you had these multiple roommate places that we lived where there was discomfort and stress for a long time.
Right.
Even with good roommates can be hard to live with, but bad ones can be impossible to live with. But that's a real life stress. So you're not comfortable or restful when you get home because you have a civil war going on in your tiny place with other personalities.
I'm going to quote, Investopedia had a really good way to say this. They said that ownership of land and home is the basis of all investment opportunities we see today. And I agree with that so hard. Like without a stable home life, like you're talking about, if you're not stacked together like cordwood with a bunch of other roommates, which is how most people afford rent in the city these days, if you don't have stability, then you can't participate in local trade or commerce. You can't participate in politics. You can't participate in like investment. Like, could you, you've started small businesses, and I almost kind of, in a weird way I have too. Could you do that without stability of, of where you live? Like,
no. And then the place I lived before I lived here was an apartment, and it wasn't uncommon. It was a good apartment, nice area. You've been there, Joe. It was okay. It wasn't, but every once in a while there would be someone screaming or a gunshot, or you know, domestic violence or your car gets smashed, and that's just life as it is. That's just the way it is.
Right.
And
And
that's not comfortable, and you're always a little bit tired because of the noise. So when you get in the house, you get stable. Oh my goodness, the show is taken off, my career is taken off, my business is taken off. Everything's gone well when you have a stable, and we see this with children when they're not moving from house to house or from grandparent to auntie. When you're stable and you're safe and you're protected, the trajectory for your life is a lot better.
right. And suddenly you become an advocate and a speaker for your own community. It's no wonder that like local activism, neighborhood associations too, or building associations, all of those stem from people who own. All of those are started and like they start and end with somebody has a stake in this little piece of land and they love being here and they want to participate in how it develops and who comes and goes and how things work out. You don't get that with renters. If half the people in a county are renters and they hate it because you're charging them all of their income, you don't get a stable Rome where the Senate wants to like vote for the best things for what happens to the empire. What you end up getting is what we're having now, which is people now are becoming more transitory. We're having people roam around and get work wherever they can, and they're putting money back in places where they think it'll actually return them some value. I was not planning to do an episode about this. We started looking at houses elsewhere. Like we were like, okay, if we're going to rent out these Airbnbs in Texas, what if we went to Canada? Like what if we didn't go there, but what if our main house was in like we looked at Niagara Falls, and you can buy a starter home for about 90,000, and you can buy a very large, very nice home for the same price as a median home here in Texas, or just really in America at this point. We started looking into.
You guys are all over the place. I mean, what's going on in you and Rachel's brain is scaring the shit out of me right now.
Well,
what about Belize? Right, you guys are all over.
I thought we were crazy. Like I was like, what a bunch of backstabbers to the American economy we are, looking to go elsewhere.
No,
But
you're looking for a better life.
yeah, but that's it. Is like, what if we took money out of this economy here in Texas and put it to a place where we could retire comfortably someday?
I think that's the dream. Like retire to Costa Rica on $10 a day. I think Americans, we like that thought, right? That thought of that paradise,
right?
That we can, the paradise that we can afford.
But it's not just going to a paradise. I mean, like I'm 100% with you on that. But it's not just a paradise we can afford. It's a house that we could own on a piece of land that isn't going to be, spoken for by an investment group already.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, like it's a realistic plan. It would work. But it would mean that we're not paying into the American system. We're not, if we're improving a land and living somewhere else, and we're just taking money from a rental Airbnb here, then we're not paying it back to the community that we started in. And that's not just us. There was a survey that came out from Coldwell Bank. A lot of their loans are real estate based. They had a survey that they looked internally for, and they found out that 92% of the high net worth Americans that they dealt with were looking to get real estate outside the US. So I thought I was crazy because I'm like, what if we just bought a house elsewhere and said, screw this system? And we just, we got our money here, but took it elsewhere. 92% of Americans who are in the upper brackets are looking at doing the same thing. So I don't feel like an absolute crazy person, but that does make me think back to Rome. The reason I started thinking in this direction was, well, shit, that's what the senators did. Like if you are a Roman senator, you pass legislation and you do things on paper that are the best for your small fiefdom, like your little kingdom that you're building. But in the end, you're not doing it for Rome, because the place that I'm at has betrayed me effectively. I think that's what everyone's feeling right now, right? Especially in the housing market, everyone's just feeling betrayal. And I realized that I was doing the same math as, like, I was rhyming with history. Like I was doing the same math that they did, where it's like, why participate here if you can't be in Rome, they called it a free peasant. That was somebody who owned their own land, and they were the backbone of politics and the legion. So I was like, well, if we don't allow people to do that here anymore, then why not look elsewhere?
One of my favorite stories about social class is from a Senator John McCain out of Arizona, and I'm a big fan of his. You know, I'm not read by any stretch, but I like him. I read we were going to do a show about him. Well, we haven't done yet about his time when he was a prisoner of war, but very inspiring life that he's had. But in 2008, he got asked by a reporter how many homes he owned, and Joe, he couldn't have had less of a clue. He had no idea. It's almost like you were asking him what he had for lunch in 1983.
Yeah.
He didn't have a goddamn clue. And doesn't that tell you when you're so rich, you don't even have a clue how many houses you own?
You've lost count. I usually like to end the episodes on a snappy saying or phrase. I'm just going to say that we're going to drop so many links and sources into this episode because I really don't want people to think I'm leading them astray. We have a couple of articles. One is by an economist from 1916, Vladimir Simkovich. He's the one that first started talking about Pliny's comments and theories that landowning senators are what ruined the empire. We're going to have articles to Investopedia. We're going to have articles to all of those counties I mentioned where they were bought up by investment groups and you effectively can't live there unless you are willing to pay $2,000 in rent. Yeah, we're going to have links to absolutely everything because I think this is a very important. I mean, like the importance of this issue cannot be overstated. The only thing bigger than this, in my opinion, is climate warming, and I live in Texas now. I know that's real.
And I think there's a lot of awareness out there. Since we did our first housing episode, and we'll put a link to that with one of my favorite episodes about there's certain places where they're banning renting. So, but every time I bring up to people nowadays that in this country and right now we're almost in that in certain markets. We are in certain markets that you're going to need generational money to even ever buy your own house. And a lot of people, I brought that up to probably 100 people on the street. Everyone agrees with me. I haven't had one person push back.
Yeah. You're dead on. And you are actually the first person who mentioned that. I used to think of this as, oh, the bar's just getting so high that it can't be cleared. You are the one that brought up the phrase generational money is how you get a house. And
and connections. You're going to have to buy from your aunt or your uncle or, and they're going to do it to you for some tax reason and part of your inheritance. And then you're going to forget that you were one of those that, and you'll quickly forget and say, hey, those people should save their money,
Right. Yeah. I will become one of the olds. I will be like, well, I worked my way through school and housing, so why can't they?
I can just see you smoking a cigar out by Niagara Falls. That's how you think, that writer, your hair kind of messed up. You know what I mean? I think you have this all figured out. You're playing chess and the rest of us are playing checkers here, Joe.
That's the trick is whatever you do in life. Like I will tell people I'm a writer, which is true. Honestly, the money will come from housing and estate. And that's everybody. If a senator says he's a senator, it's not true. He's a home investor first and he's a senator after.
You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where we have research links, show notes, feedback, and blog articles for each of our episodes.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.